having enough in it. Mr. Speaker, it can't be both.
Vital fabricant.
President Truman had on his desk, "The buck stops here." So the Prime Minister was right to apologise for the events that happened in number 10 Downing Street. 2 weeks ago, I reminded Tom Harwood that Tony Blair suggested that there should be an Office of Prime Minister so that it could be governed not from 70 Whitehall, but from the building itself. Could the Prime Minister tell me how he envisions the office will work? Will the Permanent Secretary be based in number 10, controlling what civil servants do in number 10?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, very grateful. I think the House does understand, even if many people outside don't, that number 10 actually hosts about more than 400 officials on a busy day. They have a huge amount to do, and we need to make sure. No, Mr. Speaker, they're working very hard. That's what they're doing. And we need to make sure that there are proper lines of authority and that we sort out the command structures, and that's what we're doing.
Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whatever the police decide, this update, severely limited as it is, would be enough to persuade any other Prime Minister to resign. This Prime Minister could resign and salvage for himself a crumb or two of honour, or he may try to delay and take his party down with him. So, Mr. Speaker, is it not clear that, with notable exceptions, his backbenchers should discover their backbones and sack him?
Look, Mr. Speaker, I've answered several questions like that, and I must really ask him to look at the report properly and also to wait for the inquiry when it comes.
Harper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've been asked to keep some sense of perspective, and I think that's right. The question here is whether those who make the law obey the law. That's pretty fundamental. Many have questioned, including some of my constituents, the Prime Minister's honesty and integrity and fitness to hold that office. Now, in judging him, he rightly asked us to wait for all the facts. Sue Gray has made it clear in her update today that she couldn't produce a meaningful report with the facts. So can I ask the Prime Minister the question that the Honourable Lady, the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, asked him and to which he didn't give an answer? When Sue Gray produces all of the facts in her full report after the police investigation, will he commit to publish it immediately and in full?
Mr. Speaker, what we've got to do, Sue Gray, is wait for the police to conclude their inquiries, Mr. Speaker. That is the proper thing to do. People have given all sorts of evidence in the expectation that it would not necessarily be published, Mr. Speaker. At that stage, I will take a decision about what to publish, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I imagine that I'm going to be asked to wait for something else. But can I just simply ask the Prime Minister, was the Prime Minister present at the event in his flat on the 13th of November? I assume he doesn't need other people to tell him whether he was there or not. Was he at the flat event listed in the report on the 13th of November?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for inviting me to comment on something that is being investigated. But with great respect to her, I am simply not going to indulge in running commentary. She will have to wait, Mr. Speaker.
Sir Robert Butland.
Mr. Speaker, saying sorry is very important, but my right honourable friend will be judged by the deeds that he undertakes as a result. I heard today a proper acknowledgement that he needs to look in the mirror. And I'm glad to hear about reforms to the centre of government that I think are timely. In fact, they're overdue, as he knows from previous conversations I've had with him. But will he give me and the House this undertaking today, that in cooperating with the Metropolitan Police Inquiry, he will show the appropriate tone and approach that I think the British public demand of him as a person of serious purpose who is up to the level of events. That's what we expect from him now, and that's what I'll be expecting him to do.
I thank my right honourable friend very much, and I just want to stress, Mr. Speaker, that I have great admiration for the Metropolitan Police and full confidence in the police, and I just suggest that they be allowed now to get on with their job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We now know that there's a criminal investigation into the party that took place on the 13th of November 2020 in his flat to celebrate the exit of Mr. Cummings. On the 8th of December last year, he came to that dispatch box and flatly denied the very idea that any such party had taken place. He's shaking his head in answer to my honourable friend, the member for Hornsey and Wood Green. He said it had not happened. Now, he's inadvertently, Mr. Speaker, misled the House. So the very least he should do is get to that dispatch box and correct the record.
No, Mr. Speaker, I stand by what I said, and I would simply urge him to wait for the outcome of the inquiry. That's what he needs to do.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I advise my right honourable friend publicly what I have said to emissaries from his campaign team privately, that it is truly in his interest, in the government's interest, and in the national interest that he should insist on receiving the full, unredacted report immediately, as I believe he can, and that he should then publish the uncensored version without any further delay.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, but I think extensive legal advice has been taken on this point, and Sue Gray has published everything that she thinks she can that is consistent with that advice.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the police investigation were to result in serious criminal charges necessitating a criminal trial, such as, I don't know, for example, misconduct in public office or conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, how would the Prime Minister feel about having to give evidence on oath?
Mrs. Speaker, I'm not going to speculate about hypothetical questions which frankly I reject.
Bridgen.
Mr. Speaker, you will know that it's a very rare event for any Prime Minister to come to this House and apologise. A difficult thing for any Prime Minister to do. But on the issue of the police investigation, does my right honourable friend agree with me that there should be due process, that there should be free and unfettered access to all at number 10, but most of all, there should be no prejudging or undermining of the police inquiry before it's concluded?
Yes, I completely agree, and I must say I'm shocked by some of the commentary that I've heard from the benches opposite about that matter today, Mr. Speaker.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The thing is, this is who the Prime Minister is. A serious failure to observe high standards, failures of leadership and judgment, excessive consumption of alcohol in a professional workplace, gatherings that should not have been able to take place, staff too frightened to raise concerns, parties in his own private flat. A leopard doesn't change its spots, does it? Every single one who defends this will face this again and again and again, because he still won't even admit to the House that when he came to us on the 13th of November and said the guidance and the rules were followed at all times, and on the 1st of December that all the guidelines were observed, that those things simply were not true. If he won't correct the record today, there's nothing accidental about this, is there? It's deliberate.
I don't know what he's trying to say, Mr. Speaker, but look, I direct him again to the point made by Sue Gray that no conclusions should be drawn or inferences made from this other than it is now time for the police to consider the relevant material. And that is what the House should allow them, frankly, to do.
Shall they swallow?
Speaker, it is absolutely right that over the past few weeks, our constituents across the House have been writing to us on this hugely important issue. And I don't in any way wish to minimise its importance. But in my constituency, I have military bases. And I am receiving emails from families who are concerned about their loved ones and the potential role they may end up playing given the conflict on the Russian-Ukrainian border. Members opposite may treat this lightly, but for the families who have those serving in the military do not treat it lightly. Would my right honourable friend give me an assurance that, notwithstanding the importance of the issue that we are discussing at present, his government will start addressing other important matters that concern my constituents and the constituents of people across this House?
Thank him very much indeed, and I think he's completely right. Of course, these matters are important. We've got to wait for the inquiry, but in the meantime, the UK has got to play the leading role that we are, Mr. Speaker, in bringing the West together to make a united front against Vladimir Putin, particularly with the economic sanctions that we need, Mr. Speaker. And that is the priority of the government right now.
Colin Brazier.
Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister was eating birthday cake with his pals, people were standing outside nursing home windows looking in at their loved ones dying. And contrary to what the Prime Minister has said from that very dispatch box multiple times, any objective reading of Sue Gray's update makes it absolutely clear that the rules were broken multiple times in Downing Street. Will the Prime Minister continue a habit of a lifetime and keep blaming everybody else, or will he finally stand up, take responsibility and just go?
Mr. Speaker, he's really got to read the report. And he's got to look at the report, and he's got to wait. Mr. Speaker, everything he said, I'm afraid, is not substantiated by the report. He should look and wait for the police inquiry.
Steve Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Millions of people took seriously a communications campaign apparently designed by behavioural psychologists to bully, to shame and to terrify them into compliance with minute restrictions on their freedom. What is my right honourable friend's central message to those people who meticulously complied with all of the rules and suffered terribly for it, including, I might say, those people whose mental health will have suffered appallingly as a result of the messages his government was sending out?
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank all those people for everything that they did, because together they have helped us to control coronavirus, and I think thanks to their amazing actions in coming forward to get vaccinated, we're now in a far better position than many other countries around the world. So I have a massive debt of gratitude to all the people that he describes.
Then Diana Johnson.
Question asked by my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley. I'm not asking for a running commentary, but I would like to know whether the Prime Minister was present in his flat at the event on the 13th of November 2020.
I'm really grateful to him, Mr. Speaker, and I understand why people want me to elaborate on all sorts of points, but I am not going to make a running commentary on a matter that is now being considered by the authorities. I've got to wait for them to conclude.
Andrew Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the update that we have from Sue Gray today is, as she says herself, extremely limited, and that it is not possible at present to provide a meaningful report. So will my right honourable friend confirm that at the earliest opportunity he will have the report published in full?
Mr. Speaker, what we will do is wait until the police have concluded their inquiries and then see what more we can publish. That is what we're going to do.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister will recall, on the 8th of December in Prime Minister's questions, I asked him, was there a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November? And now the report says, in the bullet point on the first page, that there was a gathering in the number 10 Downing Street flat, a gathering in the number 10 Downing Street on the departure of a special advisor. Did he inadvertently mislead this House, put us all out of our agony and stop dragging democracy through the mud?
Mr. Speaker, I stick by what I said to her, and she should wait. If she cares about democracy and due process, she should wait until the inquiry has been concluded.
Mark Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a non-drinker who long ago realised that sobriety delivers everything that alcohol promised, I've noticed with interest that a drinking culture exists in Downing Street and in fact predates my right honourable friend's tenure by some decades. Does he, like me, welcome Sue Gray's report, and will he commit to fixing that culture?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and we're certainly, Mr. Speaker, going to take up the relevant parts of her recommendations and see that they're properly enforced within the civil service and the SPAD code.
Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The shocking incompetence of the Met Police has meant that we have a report that has been gutted. But frankly, we didn't need Sue Gray to tell us about the level of dishonour and deception that has infected not only Downing Street, but so many in the party opposite. It has been excruciating to watch so many Tory MPs and ministers willing to defend the indefensible, calculating what's in their own party political interests rather than what's right for our country, complicit in the same decaying system where the pursuit of power trumps integrity. The Prime Minister is certainly a bad apple, but the whole tree is rotten and the whole country wants reform. Couldn't we make a start with a major overhaul of the ministerial code, given that its founding assumption that it could be policed by a Prime Minister of the day because they would be a person of honesty and integrity, that founding assumption has been so widely and comprehensively and utterly discredited.
Mr. Speaker, of all the things that she just... We are reforming the ministerial code, but of all the things that I disagree with her about and what she's just said, I disagree with her most passionately in what she's just said about the police. I think they do an outstanding job. I think we should allow them to get on with that job, and I will await their conclusions.
Thank you, Doyle Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I just draw attention to finding number 7 in this report, which documents that actually number 10 Downing Street has morphed from a small team in support of the Prime Minister to a self-indulgent bureaucracy all its own. And I personally am tired of reading Sunday newspapers which read officials briefing against ministers, delays by things being stuck in number 10 as I speak to ministers who are getting frustrated. So, could I ask my right honourable friend that as he institutes this review, call me old-fashioned, but ministers are accountable for decisions and that they're taken in their name, not flunkies in number 10, and will he ensure that reforms properly restore ministerial accountability?
Yes. I thank her very much, and I very much enjoyed our joint trip to Tilbury this morning, and I can tell her that, yes, I do think that it's vital, as Sue Gray says, that we learn from this and that we strengthen cabinet government and the principle of ministerial responsibility.
Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have spoken about my own experience of loss during the pandemic many times. I do not claim that my experiences are special. Indeed, they were all too common. But as a Member of Parliament, I have a responsibility to provide a voice for the bereaved families. Make no mistake, this report is utterly damning and suggests that the Prime Minister's and the government's actions were a risk to public health. How on earth can the Prime Minister stand there and justify this? Does he now accept that his actions were a complete and absolute failure of leadership and judgment?
Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and I repeat what I've said, that I am deeply sorry for all the suffering there's been throughout this pandemic, whether of his constituents or anyone in the country. As to his points about what is in the report, I don't think his views are substantiated by what the report says, but I think he should wait to see where the inquiry goes, and that's what I propose to do.
Susan Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable agree with me that those opposite have used far too much time, far too much parliamentary time debating this? And I can assure my right honourable friends that the residents of Stourbridge, they want the Prime Minister to focus on the matters that really they care about.
Just a moment. In fairness, the Prime Minister has to come and make the statement. No, I'm not going to attack the Prime Minister for making a statement. I certainly wouldn't expect from his own side, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think possibly but I want to say how strongly I agree with nonetheless with my honourable friend, because yes, of course, it's vital that we make this statement. And yes, of course, it's vital that we learn from Sue Gray's report, and vital that we take action, Mr. Speaker, which is what the government is doing. But it's also vital, frankly, that we get on with the people's priorities, and that is what this government is also doing.
Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So just to summarise, I didn't know there was a party. There was a party, but it was a work meeting, and there was a party, but I wasn't there. Why is it? The Prime Minister mentioned international negotiations. Why should anybody, any country, any government with whom we enter into negotiations deal at all and take any kind of word from a government that clearly acts with mendacity of forethought from start to beginning?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the government that took this country out of the EU and did what was necessary, and this is the government that is bringing the West together to stand up against Vladimir Putin. And those are the important considerations. As for the rest of what he said, Mr. Speaker, it's nonsense, but he should wait for the police inquiry.
Holly Bobby-Croft.
Speaker, my constituents in Scunthorpe are very keen to see the industrial energy prices fixed. Will the Prime Minister reassure me that he will not be distracted by any of this and that he will get on with the job and come forward with a solution to that issue?
Yes, I think my honourable friend is completely right. We not only need to address consumer energy costs, we need to address business and industrial energy costs as well. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be bringing forward a package of measures as soon as he can.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, during his statement, the Prime Minister kept referring to we when he talks about the sorry saga that Sue Gray has reported. But, Mr. Speaker, it's his rules, it's his rule breaking, it's his inability to tell the truth about it that's the issue. He is the Prime Minister. Does he not take any personal responsibility at all for this disgraceful fiasco?
Mr. Speaker, I've taken full responsibility throughout the pandemic.
Richard Fuller.
Speaker, as with the report on Owen Paterson, I felt it was important to support the process and read the report. And that's because I think it's important to separate fact from allegation and to know what the report actually says rather than what I would wish it to say. Two lessons that the Leader of the Opposition needs to learn. I promised my constituents that I would ask the Prime Minister to say that he would support the recommendations in the report. There are four. That every government department has a clear and robust policy in place covering the consumption of alcohol in the workplace. That access to the garden, including for meetings, should be invitation only and in a controlled environment. That there should be easier ways for staff to raise such concerns, basically whistleblowing, and that too much responsibility and expectation is placed on the senior official whose principal function is the direct support of the Prime Minister. Those are the facts and the findings of the report. Will the Prime Minister accept them in full?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do. And as I've said to the House earlier on, I accept the findings of the report in full, the general findings, and we are immediately taking steps to implement the changes.
Maria Riedel.
The Prime Minister's just said he accepts the findings of the report. One of them says that there were failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10 in the Cabinet Office at different times. He provides the political leadership and the political judgment at Number 10. Does he accept his own personal wrongdoing and failings in this regard.
Mr. Speaker, not only have I accepted full responsibility throughout, but I have apologised repeatedly to the House for any misjudgments that I may have made myself. But again, I must urge her to wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
Aaron Bell.
It seems a lot of people attended events in May 2020. The one I recall attending was my grandmother's funeral. She was a wonderful woman. As well as a love for her family, she served her community as a councillor, and she served Dartford Conservative Association loyally for many years. I drove for 3 hours from Staffordshire to Kent. Only 10 people at the funeral. Many people who loved her had to watch online. I didn't hug my siblings. I didn't hug my parents. I gave a eulogy. And then afterwards, I didn't even go to her house for a cup of tea. I drove back 3 hours from Kent to Staffordshire. Does the Prime Minister think I'm a fool?
No, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable friend, and I want to say how deeply I sympathise with him and his family for their loss. And all I can say is, again, that I'm very, very sorry for misjudgments that may be made by me or anybody else in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. And I can only ask him respectfully, Mr. Speaker, to look at what Sue Gray has said, but also to wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
I'm Efford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important that this House can trust what ministers tell us from that dispatch box. And on the 8th of December, regarding events at number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister said, "I repeat that I've been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. That is what I've been repeatedly assured." Now, the people who gave him those assurances led to him inadvertently misleading the House. So have those people faced any disciplinary proceedings?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, he needs to I'm afraid, to await the conclusions of the police inquiry, because I'm afraid the premise of his question may or may not be substantiated. But what I can tell the House is, yes, as I've said before, there certainly will be changes in the way we do things and changes in Number 10.
Duncan Baker.
Speaker, North Norfolk consistently had some of the lowest levels of infection in the country. We followed the rules. So many of my constituents have been incensed. The damage that this is doing to the government is enormous. It is about integrity and trust. Can I ask again, because people want to know, how can the Prime Minister now satisfy my constituents and assure me that full accountability and transparency on the findings of the final Gray report will swiftly follow?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will do whatever I can to ensure that this House has as much clarity as possible. There are legal issues that we face, Mr. Speaker, about some of the testimony that has been given. But in the meantime, what I think Sue Gray wants us to do is to wait for the conclusion of the investigation, of the inquiry, and to see where that goes, and to support the police in their work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister need somebody else to tell him whether he was there or he is there now?
I refer the Honourable Lady to the answer I've already given.
Simon Baines.
Mr. Speaker, we all recognise that number 10 Downing Street is an unusual amalgam of workplace, office space and private home. What steps will the Prime Minister take to ensure that the lines between each of them are made clearer in the future?
Mr. Speaker, you will see that there are reference to that very problem in Sue Gray's report, and we're going to take steps, Mr. Speaker, to clarify things and to make sure there is greater transparency in the lines of command.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister recognise that repeatedly making statements, including from that dispatch box, which turn out subsequently to be untrue, is a serious problem? Or does he not recognise that?
Mr. Speaker, I really think he's prejudging things, and he should wait for the conclusion of the inquiries.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the fact that my right honourable friend has come to this House as a first step in responding to this report. He's also rightly outlined that the relationship between Number 10 and this House needs to improve. So will he reassure me that he'll continue to come to this House to update us on the implementation of the recommendations in Sue Gray's report and how that will happen?
Mr. Speaker, I will, of course, I'm only too happy to assure the House that we intend to make changes starting from now, and I will keep the House updated.
Paul Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When there's a failure of leadership and an inappropriate culture in an organisation, the person at the top should go. This outrageous debacle hasn't happened in spite of the Prime Minister. This has happened because of the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister now do the right thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, the answer is no, because I'm going to wait for the conclusions of the inquiry before any of the assertions that she's made can be established.
Greg Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, particularly the acknowledgement of the enormous sacrifice that so many British people went through. And as somebody who was unable to say goodbye to my grandparents this time last year, can I welcome his sincere apology. But as we wait for the Metropolitan Police findings, can my right honourable friend give me a categoric assurance that it will be full speed ahead on fixing the Northern Ireland Protocol, standing up for our friends in Ukraine and fixing the cost of living crisis?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what this government is going to do, and nor will we be distracted for 1 minute.
Wayne David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the general findings to Sue Gray's report, there's a reference to the failure of leadership and judgment by Number 10. Does the Prime Minister accept that Sue Gray was largely referring to him?
Mr. Speaker, I really think that he should recite the whole report, but I have told him that I accept the findings. That Sue Gray has given in full, and we are acting on them today.
Natalie Elsie.
Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's apology. He's taken responsibility, he's apologised, and it's right that he should do so. Can my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, confirm that tackling the small boats crisis will remain top of the new office of the Prime Minister? Because that's what the country wants to see. We want to see this Prime Minister getting on with the job.
Yes, that's right, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we brought forward the Nationalities and Borders Bill, which I'm delighted to say that she supports, that this government is getting through, which that party voted against.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you. The flippancy of some of the answers today and the non-answers to other questions don't suggest that the Prime Minister is genuinely that sorry. Does he recognise the long-term damage he risks doing to historic norms of democracy? Is it right that they are sacrificed for the interests of one man who refused to do what the country knows needs to happen? And can he point to one single example where he personally has improved standards in public life?
How about, Mr. Speaker, deciding to honour the wishes of the people and deliver Brexit in spite of their attempts, Mr. Speaker, to subvert democracy?
Rob Roberts.
Mr. Speaker, delivery is key. The Prime Minister delivers. He delivered on Brexit. He delivered with furlough and with the self-employed scheme that ensured businesses were able to survive. They can shout it down because they don't like it, Mr. Speaker, that's fine. He delivered with one of the best vaccination programmes in the world. He delivered a country that is coming out of a pandemic and an economy that is thriving, with people who sadly lost their jobs in the last 2 years having more vacancies than ever to choose from. But nobody talks about those things, Mr. Speaker, because all sides of those things...
Order. I think the Prime Minister may have just got a grip of what you've had to say. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're going to deliver on the people's priorities, and we're going to deliver and keep delivering for Wales.
Floor in session, Lomi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the hardest things I had to do as an MP is speak to the family of Ismail Mohammed Abdulwali. He was 13 years old when he died on the 30th of March. He was one of the youngest people to lose his life to COVID. I will admit, Mr. Speaker, when I spoke to his mother, I broke down on that call. Ishmael's family, like so many other constituents up and down in Vauxhall, followed the rule. Many of them were scared to go out. Many of them had to bury their loved ones without being there. Many of them walked past the COVID memorial wall in my constituency with that heart showing their loss. Does the Prime Minister now understand, and does he not feel ashamed that his actions have brought disrepute to the office that he holds?
Mr. Speaker, of course I share the Honourable Lady's grief for Ishmael. I sympathise with Ishmael's family, and I understand the pain and loss that everybody's experienced throughout this country. But, Mr. Speaker, all I can say is that I will continue to do my best to fight COVID as I have done throughout this pandemic and to deliver for the British people. And I can't say more than that.
Michael Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, running an office and having the required management expertise of running literally dozens and dozens of offices with hundreds and hundreds of people within is one thing. Running the country and getting the big decisions right are quite another. So can I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to have a look at what is happening at number 10 and those management structures so that we can deliver on the promises and the Brexit promises we gave the people of this country.
I thank him very much, and that's why we're taking up the findings of the Sue Gray report. We want to make sure that number 10 works better, that the whole of the government works better. It's been focused very much on COVID, but we now need to deliver exclusively on the great priorities of the people.
Anna Balda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last summer, my team and I said goodbye to our colleague through the window of her hospice as she died of cancer. We didn't get to hug her, and we were just like many millions of people across the UK. We followed the rules, while he and his colleagues didn't. And it makes me sick to my stomach that we are not going to get the findings of this report because the police were so late to the party. The same Met Police who were happy to arrest women who were protesting the murder of Sarah Everard. And it makes me sick to my stomach that he does not understand the anger and fury and upset of millions of people across the UK, because sometimes, Mr. Speaker, an apology won't cut it. It's time for action. It's time for a clear-out. It's time for him to resign.
Mr. Speaker, I sympathise very much with the experience of her constituents and all the pain that people have gone through throughout this pandemic. I must say to her, though, that she is prejudging the issue in question today. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I have a great deal of respect for the police, and I think they should be allowed to get on with their job.
Paul Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we've got to remember that we're all talking about the breaking of the rules, and the rules clearly are under question here as to what's happened. But the rules themselves that were put out by this government have got this country to where it is. And we've got to remember that those rules did the right thing. So yes, there's got to be consequences in number 10 for any rules that have been broken, but please remember the right thing was done by the instigation of the rules in the first place. And I have to say, when I'm talking to my constituents out there, they're saying, yes, we need to ask the question about what's happened there, but can we stop being that as the only sole subject, and can the opposition talk about something else as well, please? Do we need to move on and level up this country?
I thank my honourable friend very much, and I think he's right. The rules are important, and it was amazing and remains amazing to see the way people pulled together throughout the pandemic, and I thank people very much. But what we need to do, if we possibly can, Mr. Speaker, if the opposition would agree, we now need to focus on the issues that matter above all to the British people: fixing the cost of living, rebuilding our economy, clearing the COVID backlogs. That's what this government is doing.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker,
I have known the Prime Minister a long time, and we've always got on quite well. He's not a wicked man, but he's a man that for years, in every job, has got by flying on the seat of his pants. He has a chaotic management style, and that is a question of character. And can I ask him really to look in the mirror, as he said this morning, and say, am I the man at this challenging time for our country, abroad, at home, in every sense? Has he the character to carry on and do that job properly?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, because quite frankly, I think it was absolutely indispensable that we had a strong number 10 that was able to take us out of the EU in spite of all the efforts of the party opposite to block it. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, a booster and a vaccine campaign that were led by number 10 that have made a dramatic difference, not just to the health of this country, but to the economic fortunes of this country. And whatever he says about me and my leadership, that is what we have delivered in the last year alone.
Scott Benson.
You, Mr. Speaker, when knocking indoors in Blackpool at the weekend, I spoke to Julie, who said this. This Prime Minister has had the most difficult job in living history. He's been dealing with a pandemic in which he nearly died. He's been dealing with the media who haven't forgiven him for delivering Brexit. And yet, he's been dealing with the media who haven't forgiven him yet for dealing with Brexit, and he hasn't had a chance to crack on and deliver yet for the British people on their priorities. The report today has come out. The Prime Minister has apologised. Let's allow him to get on and deal. He wants to hear it.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say how passionately, vehemently and emphatically I agree with the remarks, which I couldn't quite hear, of my honourable friend. He is completely right, Mr. Speaker, and I think that is the priority of the British people. That's the priority of the government.
Brams.
Mr. Speaker, as limited as the Gray report was, we know that the findings are still incredibly damning. Multiple issues around failures of leadership and judgment. Now, given that the Nolan principles and standards of public life describe the centrality of integrity, honesty and leadership, how can the Prime Minister continue?
I really think that she needs to read the report carefully, Mr. Speaker, and I'm afraid that the conclusions that she's drawing are not ones that I support. But what we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is following Sue Gray's advice, and we are changing the way number 10 runs, and we are going to do things differently, Mr. Speaker. But I can't agree with what she says.
Catherine Fletcher.
Mr. Speaker, on Saturday I was out and about enjoying ice cream in Lancashire, which I know you and your family do in some of the finest ice cream parlours in the north of England. And they said to me, he's a Wally, but 100,000 Russians have just turned up. What the bloody hell are we doing talking about cake? Does the Prime Minister agree with that statement?
Mrs. Speaker, I thank her very much. I thank her very much, and I think that what the country needs and what the West needs. Sorry.
Can I just say, if you don't want to carry on the question, I'm happy to pull stumps now. But if we are going to have questions, I'm going to hear the answers as well as the questions. Prime Minister. Standing up, mate. You're going to have to sit down for a bit.
What the country needs now, Mr. Speaker, is a UK government working with our friends and partners to stand up to Vladimir Putin and to make sure that we have a strong package of sanctions, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister sets the culture at number 10. Why does he think that staff members there felt unable to raise their concerns about the bad behaviours reported today?
Mr. Speaker, that is one of the recommendations of the Sue Gray inquiry that we are going to take up to make sure that nobody should feel that in number 10, and that's why we're going to review the code to ensure that nobody feels that they have any inhibition on coming forward with any complaint that they may have.
Mr.
Speaker, the Prime Minister and his allies are trying to distract and deflect from the truth.
but here are the indisputable facts. The Prime Minister attended Downing Street parties. He told this House and the people that we represent that he attended no parties, and in fact that there were no parties. The rules were clearly broken. The ministerial code has been violated. So when will he stop insulting the intelligence of the British people and do the right thing and resign?
Mr. Speaker, I really think she's got to let the Metropolitan Police get on and do their job.
Brendan O'Hara.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister not recognise that the public are rapidly losing faith in the institutions that they must be able to trust if our democracy is to survive? Because it appears that there is no individual, no organisation, no group or no force whose reputation won't be sacrificed on the altar of saving this Prime Minister. So can I ask the Prime Minister, does he consider the erosion of public trust in the foundations of our democracy a price worth paying to ensure his personal survival?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that amongst the foundations of our democracy are due process and the rule of law and allowing the police to get on with their job, and that's what we're going to do.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Part 4 of Sue Gray's report says that there is a culture of excessive consumption of alcohol, which is not appropriate. Is there also a culture of excessive drug taking in Downing Street?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, any drug taking would be excessive, and perhaps he should direct that question at the Labour front bench.
Good question. Direct Twig.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard all about prejudging things today. You only have to look at paragraph 3 of the general findings, which talks about failures of leadership, judgment in different parts of number 10 at the Cabinet Office, and it says some events should never have been allowed to take place and other events should not have been allowed to develop as it did. I don't think that's prejudging anything, it's very clear. There's only one person in charge of number 10 in totality, and that's the Prime Minister. So let me just remind the Prime Minister why this matters about this rule breaking and the way number 10 behaved. Let me quote a constituent, one of a number of emails I had from constituents who lost loved ones. She said to me, "We received a call at 11:15 p.m. on the 29th of May 2020 saying Mum was deteriorating. Both my sister and I drove to the home and spent the night sat on a chair outside her bedroom window watching her die. All I could do was sob and shout to her and tell her that I loved her. I couldn't even hold her hand." That's why you should go, Prime Minister.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I totally understand the feelings of his constituents, and I accept that things could have been done better in number 10, as I've told the House before. But really, I must ask him to study what Sue Gray has said, and we are acting on all her recommendations.
Nadine Whittam.
Which one of them, Mr. Speaker?
She's there. Nadine Whittam.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister explain how changing the civil service hierarchy will prevent him from breaching the COVID regulations, as he has admitted in this House? When will he take responsibility for his own actions, stop hiding behind other people? My constituents don't want another government department. They want him to resign.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's wrong in what she said, and I direct her to what I've said earlier on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's been further revealed that in April 2021, as the Prime Minister partied, he also swiftly rejected the idea of bereavement bubbles for those who'd lost loved ones, suffered miscarriages, stillbirths, or a child neonatal death. Far from getting it, he's deflected, laughed and smirked his way through this statement. He's a disingenuous man, isn't he?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, this has been a harrowing and tragic experience for the entire country. We've done our best to deal with it. And as for what she says about what's been going on in number 10, I ask her to look at the report, but also to wait for the police inquiry.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this afternoon we've heard the distraction, the deflection, there's confusion, and we can't even get the answers to the most simplest of questions about whether we can actually get the full report published when it's available. So, Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Prime Minister, is it the case now that we're looking at a situation of hobble hobble, quack quack?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, nothing would give me greater pleasure than to publish everything that we currently have. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that there are legal impediments and we have to wait until the police inquiry is concluded.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I accept entirely what the Prime Minister has just said. It is absolutely essential that we wait. It's absolutely essential that we wait until we hear the next stage in these proceedings in relation to any future investigations. I'd also like to draw attention to the historic achievements of this Prime Minister in relation to not only delivering Brexit, but in relation to delivering the vaccine rollout and in relation to his dealings with Mr. Putin. And I believe that everybody should take that most firmly into account.
I thank you very much, and I think he's completely right. He might have added, by the way, that we have the fastest economic growth in the G7, Mr. Speaker, thanks to the steps this government has been taking.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. We've established that there were parties. We are just really arguing about who is responsible. And as the Honourable Member for Thurrock said earlier, that's a minister. So if it's not him, is it the member for Surrey Heath or North East Cambridgeshire who should be facing the sack?
Prime Minister.
I remind the Honourable Lady what Sue Gray says in her paragraph. Well, no such conclusion can be drawn so far, Mr. Speaker. She must wait. She must wait for the conclusion of the inquiry.
Janet Davey.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced at the weekend that he would be calling President Putin to urge de-escalation of the situation in Ukraine. The Mirror have just reported that today the call has been cancelled because he's been dealing with the Sue Gray report. So can the Prime Minister confirm that on a matter of such grave importance that this report is correct and that he will be speaking to Vladimir Putin as soon as he leaves the chamber?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be speaking to President Putin as soon as I can.
Leila Mourad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have read the report in full, and I think the most striking sentence was the one that there were failures of leadership and judgment in different parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office at different times. My constituents who've been writing to me whilst the Prime Minister has been speaking say that he should resign, but they also want to know the full facts. Once the Met has concluded, why could he not then publish the full unredacted report?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we'll have to see where the police get to. We'll have to see the conclusion of their inquiry. We'll have to see what the legal position is then, Mr. Speaker.
Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituents are deeply troubled and angry by the frequent scandals engulfing the Prime Minister's administration. Because it's not just the Partygate and ongoing cover-up, but all the other things. The proroguing of Parliament, the treatment of the Queen, the 3.5...
You're watching GB News, and I think we can all agree, can't we? A fairly extraordinary session, an extraordinary, what was it, best part of an hour and a half there, questions directed at the Prime Minister of varying degrees of intensity and at times antipathy, certainly where the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, was concerned. With me throughout that, listening intently, Michael Portillo, former Cabinet Minister, observer of British politics. Over the years, what did you make of that, Michael Portillo?
What I made of it was that the Prime Minister lost some ground today. I think it was not a good day for him. To go back to the beginning, he made a statement which I think started quite well with an apology. He tried an old trick which works at question time of becoming very bombastic about the government's great achievements. I think in the context, it did not work. Keir Starmer was probably at his best ever.
He looked absolutely furious.
Almost ashen with rage, I would say. And the two leaders traded personal insults in a way that I've never heard before. The Conservative backbenches looked to me pretty sullen. By the way, the front bench as well. Ministers look pretty sullen as well. There was a bit of noise, but you couldn't see physical signs of support for the Prime Minister. There were a couple of devastating questions, one from Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, one from Andrew Mitchell, one from a backbencher who told a harrowing story of driving, I think, to his mother's funeral and asking the Prime Minister, when that backbencher had obeyed the rules, whether he was a fool to do so. So some very, very tough questions indeed. The House of Commons is deeply frustrated, as I think we all are, by the fact that this report now has not come out in full. Even the author of the report, Sue Gray, says that it is not particularly meaningful. This is because it's all been postponed to a Met inquiry, and people find themselves having to wait again. And the terrible problem for the Conservative backbenchers is, can they make a decision now on this snippet that they've been delivered of Sue Gray's report, something which she herself says is not meaningful? They're being asked to make a decision as to whether Boris should go on as Prime Minister or not. Pretty difficult for them. But I thought it slipped a bit from him today.
And we know that MPs are meeting at 6:30. And we've also got, and we'll bring you at least parts of it, Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, talking about Ukraine. And on another day, it will be a big story, Sajid Javid, Health Secretary, reflecting on, well, we think announcing that there will be a U-turn on the policy of mandatory vaccines for NHS staff. On any other day, there will be headline stories, but not today. It's 5 o'clock. Well, coming up then in the next hour, those angry scenes in the House of Commons as the Prime Minister faced questions on the Sue Gray party report. Sir Keir Starmer calling for Boris Johnson to go, and the SNP's Ian Blackford, led from the chamber, will have reaction to those events coming right up. Also in 30 minutes from now, a major change, we think, in policy on compulsory jabs. The Health Secretary expected to tell MPs that unvaxxed NHS staff will not now lose their jobs. And we'll bring you more from the former Defence Secretary, Michael Portillo, who's very patiently waited here throughout the course of the last hour. We're going to get the headlines first before we talk to Michael.
Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he is sorry for the things the government did not get right following the publication of Sue Gray's report into Downing Street gatherings during coronavirus restrictions. Sue Gray says her published report is extremely limited due to an ongoing police investigation. Here are some of her key findings. Against the backdrop of the pandemic, some of the behaviour surrounding the gatherings investigated is difficult to justify. At least some of the gatherings represent a serious failure to observe high standards. The report described failures of leadership and judgment by parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. Some staff wanted to raise concerns about behaviours they witnessed at work, but at times felt unable to do so. The Met Police say they've been given more than 300 photos and 500 pieces of paper as part of the investigation into the parties. Boris Johnson says he accepts Sue Gray's general findings in full and that he will overhaul the operation in Downing Street and the Cabinet Office to address the concerns raised. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer appealed to Conservative MPs in the Commons, telling them they know Boris Johnson is not fit for office.
They know better than anyone how unsuitable he is for high office. Many of them knew in their hearts that we would inevitably come to this one day. And they know that as night follows day, continuing his leadership will mean further misconduct, cover-up and deceit. It is only they that can end this farce. The eyes of the country are upon them. They will be judged by the decisions they take now.
The Foreign Secretary will shortly announce tougher sanctions which could be used to target senior figures linked to Vladimir Putin's administration. Liz Truss is travelling with the Prime Minister to Kiev tomorrow for crisis talks with the Ukrainian president amid fears over Russia's military build-up at the border. Boris Johnson is due to speak to Vladimir Putin today. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is visiting counterparts in Hungary, Slovenia and Croatia with the aim of de-escalating tensions over Ukraine by strengthening links with allies. The government is expected to announce a U-turn over compulsory COVID vaccines for NHS workers. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is reportedly going to scrap the policy over fears it could lead to a major staffing crisis. He's due to make a statement in the Commons later. Speaking to reporters in Essex this morning, the Prime Minister said all healthcare professionals should get a vaccine.
My view about NHS workers and everybody who is involved in looking after vulnerable people, all healthcare professionals should get a vaccine. That's absolutely clear. I think that Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, is going to be saying a bit more later on about how you might deal with different variants of coronavirus, because they have different implications when it comes to transmissibility.
More than 45,000 homes are without power after back-to-back storms hit the UK over the weekend. Most of those affected are in Scotland. Network Rail says train services are also being disrupted by trees that have fallen. A British woman who was found guilty of lying about being gang raped in Cyprus has had her conviction overturned. The woman, who is now 21, was given a 4-month suspended sentence in 2020 for public mischief after withdrawing her allegation. The Supreme Court of Cyprus found she'd not been given a fair trial. Footballer Christian Eriksen has signed for Premier League club Brentford 7 months after suffering a cardiac arrest on the pitch while playing for Denmark. The 29-year-old, who's been fitted with an internal defibrillator, hasn't played since he collapsed at Euro 2020. The former Tottenham midfielder has signed a 6-month deal. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Brazier.
GB News and thinks this is all a lot of sound and fury, signifying nothing when we bang on about Boris Johnson. Perhaps you've just spent the last 90 minutes watching events in Parliament and perhaps have started to come to a different conclusion. Let's show you what's going on in Parliament now. The Prime Minister, I believe, still on his feet at the dispatch box, answering questions there from a Liberal Democrat MP. The opposition bench is, I think it's fair to say, still fairly well populated, and significantly Michael Portillo. The government bench is rather less so.
Yes, so a few Conservative backbenchers asked spectacularly hostile questions, and a few asked questions which were emollient, which
fairly benign.
Prime Minister, which were what?
Fairly benign.
Oh, very benign indeed. But the majority said nothing at all, and I thought that was quite significant. The majority, I think, now want to go off and think about what they're going to do.
Well, they haven't got long. They're meeting at 6:30, and they've got to decide something by then, haven't they? Maybe.
Well, they've got to decide. Each one has to decide individually whether to send in a letter or not. And the decision is complicated because although the Prime Minister has been using the Metropolitan Police inquiry as a delaying tactic in his answers today, it is a point for them. Can they condemn the man before all the evidence is in? Are these headlines that we've seen from the report sufficient to send him packing? I think that is quite a difficult decision. But to your point about, what is the significance of the House of Commons, it is, of course, meant to be the assembly of the nation. And many MPs today arrived with stories from their own families, but stories from their constituents. Some of them, of course, very harrowing about the experiences that they've been through. And so a lot of the anger of the nation, I think, was very accurately brought together in the Chamber today. I thought the Chamber was doing a good job today at representing the nation.
But there's, lawyers talk a lot about proportionality, don't they? And there will be, and we heard it reflected in the Chamber, some MPs saying, Prime Minister, we're still very grateful to you. We haven't lost that sense of gratitude that we felt then when Brexit was delivered, when you delivered a commanding 80-seat majority nobody was predicting, when you delivered vaccines in the way that have been so successful, certainly when we compare to our European counterparts. But that emotion that's running so raw today, and as you say, individual calculations by each MP.
But you see, there's another complication, because of course it's obvious that emotions are running very high today. What they have to calculate is how high will they be running in 2.5 years' time.
Or in 2 weeks,
or
2 days.
in 2 weeks, because I think it's already changed quite a lot. I think things have cooled down quite a lot before today. I thought Boris had been doing better. Today has not been a good day for him. Another of his mistakes, I thought, was he delivered this line I've got it, I'll fix it. In other words, I understand what's gone wrong and I'm going to put it right. But I don't think anyone with the most generous heart believes that Boris is the sort of man who can fix things. And remember, this is not the first time that it's been alleged that Number 10 is going to be reset. After Dominic Cummings left, which was a chaotic situation, it was implied that the grown-ups had been admitted to Number 10 and that everything was going to be all right. But now, about a year later, it's being said all these people have to leave, and in fact there has to be a terrific reform of the system of Number 10. So I don't think any Member of Parliament is going to give much credence to Boris Johnson saying, I'm going to fix it.
We are still listening, and we are across what those backbenchers are saying. I mean, the truth is, questions from the government benches have pretty much dried up. It's all coming really from the opposition right now, and we've reflected a lot of that over the course of the last hour and a half or so. Just on specific interventions today, former Prime Minister Theresa May, dignified in what she had to say, but it was cutting to Andrew Mitchell, former Secretary of State for International Development, just said, Prime Minister, you've run out of road. I will no longer be supporting you. We do not know for how many people they speak.
Now, Theresa May went to the heart of the matter because, is Boris Johnson saying that he didn't know what the rules were, or that he did know what the rules were and he broke them? I mean, either one is pretty bad. And to have that delivered by a former Prime Minister, a recent former Prime Minister, is pretty hard to listen to. Andrew Mitchell, I don't know how many people he represents. I mean, I think a little bit like David Davis a couple of weeks ago. He was trying to be the man who created the mood setter. I rather doubt whether that's the case. There's one remarkable thing about the Tory party at the moment, I think, which is there are a lot of young people and different people who came in 2019, and they don't have much regard for the older people in the party. This new intake typically is working class, they're from their communities, they're from the North, they're from the West Midlands, and they don't have a lot to do with these people who represent seats in other parts of the country who've been in the House for 20 years. So when an Andrew Mitchell or a David Davis gets up and thinks that he's going to guide the party, he's probably wrong.
There will be those people looking at this and saying Prime Minister should be on the phone right now, talking to Vladimir Putin. We thought actually this would carry on until 4:30. With half an hour of the Prime Minister, time for Keir Starmer to say what he's got to say, and then we move on. That phone call hasn't happened.
Well, and this is where these things run together in the most horrible way. Can you imagine in Moscow, someone has gone to Putin and said, very sorry, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom cannot be on the phone. He's detained in the House of Commons, fighting for his life, because he may have attended some parties. I mean, Putin would regard this firstly with complete contempt and also think that we have the most ridiculous system compared with his. But the fact is that when Boris does get on the phone to Putin, what kind of authority will Boris carry when Putin knows that Boris's existence is hanging by a thread?
Culture talked of, and we haven't addressed part of what Sue Gray was saying in her report, but the boozy culture at Downing Street was one of the things that was touched upon. There was a couple of slightly surreal exchanges in the last 90 minutes or so. A Labour backbencher talking about, in fact, forgive me, it may have been a Conservative backbencher talking about consumption of booze in Number 10, how it needed to stop. The Prime Minister hit back by talking about, and all this, of course, under parliamentary privilege, so they can say what they like, talking about Class A drug use on the Labour front bench. Did I mishear that, Michael?
I didn't personally hear the word Class A, but I did hear the reference to the Labour front bench, and that was in response, actually, to, I think, a Labour backbencher. I did not get the allusion. I mean, maybe there's something going on in the gossip of Westminster which made sense of that remark. But I did say earlier that I thought there was a new abrasiveness to the tone.
Really was.
Between Starmer and Boris, and it is getting pretty dirty.
Is there no case, and we'll go back to the House very shortly, but is there no case, just to take the contrary view, for saying that when people are working really hard under loads of pressure, that sometimes actually the esprit de corps, the camaraderie, the thing that makes them all bind together and work through that crisis, sometimes involves a bit of lubrication, in moderation?
When I was the Secretary of State, I very often ended the day by opening a bottle of bubbly when my staff had achieved something outstanding. So yes, indeed. But remember that these circumstances were rather different because the entire country had been told that it could not do these things. The government had decided to take away, at a minute level, our liberties. And I think, I'm afraid, what happened with the character of Boris was that he didn't believe in the restrictions. He was bounced into them, forced into them. And And his kind of way, I think, of protesting against what he didn't believe in was not to observe them himself. Of course, lots of people took the same attitude. But it so happened that he was the Prime Minister and he had imposed these restrictions. And some of them were, in my view, absolutely inhumane. The ones that touched upon death and dying were absolutely inhumane. And that is why he's in such trouble today.
And also why he may yet be in trouble, we don't know, but may be in trouble in the future, because there were repeatedly questions put about when, if and when he will allow the Sue Gray report to be published in full. Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, was critical of the police, saying in terms they've interfered in this process. There is an argument, isn't there, Michael Portillo, that this idea that somehow Sue Gray's report can be prejudicial to justice, some people just do not buy that at all.
Well, I thought the head of the Met, Cressida Dick's intervention in this was extraordinary. I don't know why she couldn't simply have said, when the report has been published, the police will want to look at it and see whether there's any prima facie evidence which would make us interested. She has put an immense banner in the works, and I think a lot of frustration was shown in the House of Commons today. People do not believe this. There are even some who suspect that, the Met Police has tried to help out Boris because this thing has been kicked almost into the long grass. It certainly is unsatisfactory. This matter, which has festered for many, many weeks, will now go on forever and a day. I'm afraid I was rather on Caroline Lucas's side in thinking that what the Met had done was wholly inappropriate. Certainly a lot of people are angry. Even Sue Gray, I mean, you don't often hear expressions of opinion from a civil servant who's doing a job behind the scenes, but it was very clearly reported in yesterday's newspapers that she was furious with the Met over what had been done to her report.
Boris Johnson has said, I get it and I will fix it. I think by my reckoning he said sorry 3 times. Is that enough? What will happen at 6:30 when Tory MPs gather? More immediately, what's Liz Truss got to say, our Foreign Secretary, about the situation in Ukraine, and also our Health Secretary Sajid Javid with a statement that may mean that mandatory COVID jab for something like 75,000 NHS staff no longer needs to happen. Mandatory jabs may be about to be ditched. All that coming up in the next hour or so. Time for the weather now, though.
Do you think the vaccine thing?
I think so.
It's disgraceful.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Well, if you are just switching on, it's been one of those dramatic days in Parliament. The Prime Minister has been on his feet for the best part of getting on for 2 hours. I think it's probably not unreasonable to say fighting for his political life. I mean, that sounds a little melodramatic, doesn't it? But if you'd sat through what he had to say, how he said it as well, and some of the venom that was directed towards him, and not just from the opposition benches, then you might be minded to share that assessment. But the parliamentary shenanigans ongoing, because the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, expected to speak in a few minutes' time, and there's a bit of a political coup de theatre going on as well, announcing, we think, the end of mandatory vaccinations for NHS workers. Joining me now is someone who's been opposed to vaccine mandates throughout. Dr. Claire Craig is co-chair of the Heart Group, an organisation of medical professionals created to express concerns about COVID policies. You've won, Doctor, I think, haven't you?
I think, assuming the announcement is what's predicted, then I think we should be taking a moment to celebrate, yes.
He's not putting you off, I hope, but Michael Portillo, former Cabinet Minister alongside you, who knows how not personally how U-turns are executed, but we are looking at a U-turn, aren't we, on this?
I assume so, and I very much hope so. I think this is a very misguided policy. But what really shocks me about a Conservative government is that this policy was enacted in the private sector. It was enacted in the care homes. Businesses have found it fantastically difficult to get by with people that they had to push out because they weren't vaccinated. When it came to their own sector, the National Health Service, they saw they were staring disaster in the face, and so they've changed the policy. I think it's really disgraceful that the Conservative government has behaved so badly towards the care homes and only at the last minute has recognised the disaster that was brewing in the NHS.
Some people, Claire, will wonder, was this the plan all along? You shake the tree, you scare as many NHS employers as possible into having the double jab and booster, and then you say, as you approach the 11th hour, when you realise it is a crisis, actually, it's OK, really.
It certainly has felt like that, and they really did take it right to the wire. And I mean, a lot of what's been done feels like psychological games and very unfair. And it has been incredibly hard for the people who've been facing losing their jobs. And there have been a lot of them speaking out today about how emotional it's been for them today.
I just wonder on that. I mean, we've interviewed several clinicians here. I can think in particular of one with Dr. Claire Goodman, her interview with me. I mean, 500,000 people watched it on YouTube. The message was getting through, but it wasn't just the numbers of people listening to the message. It was the way the message was delivered. And not just Claire Goodman, if you think of Steve James, who, very bravely, I think, tackled the Health Secretary on the wards, an anaesthetist. Here's somebody who's not some knuckle-dragging headbanger from the wilder shores of conspiracy theory land, but real clinicians who'd worked on COVID wards, but still said, actually, don't make me have the jab.
Well, quite. And one of the things that concerns me about how this story is panning out is that the excuse they're using for the U-turn is the fact that Omicron is milder. Now, that's the wrong reason. We may well have more variants in the future which aren't as mild. The reason to overturn it is because bodily autonomy is a fundamental way we practice medicine. It's a fundamental part of the social contract and the power that we each have, which is limited, but it includes what happens to our own bodies. And it's laid out in the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights. It's laid out. You have to have informed consent. You don't make decisions about other people's bodies. And it specifically says that the individual's decision overrides the interests of society. Now, that obviously doesn't really apply here anyway, when these vaccines aren't doing what they were sold as doing.
Michael Portillo, I'm not a great fan of the BBC. I make one exception for the moral maze, where you're a regular panellist. This is the stuff of the moral maze, isn't it? Bodily autonomy versus the fact you have, no man or woman is an island unto themselves. If you if you are transmitting, then that's a problem for other people. It's not just about you. It's a real moral quandary.
This is the stuff of the moral maze. You're absolutely right. But I think the point that the government failed to carry was strong evidence that if you had been vaccinated, you would not contract COVID and you would not pass it on. It was pretty clearly established that you were likely to be less ill if you'd been vaccinated. That failure to carry that point, I think, was fundamental. But in a free society, I think we should celebrate the fact that we got so many people vaccinated. I'm very pro-vaccination myself. I think we should celebrate that we got so many people vaccinated by voluntary means and that we were able to defeat COVID, because I think we are defeating COVID at the moment without compulsion. And I think we should hang our heads that we treated the care homes differently from the National Health Service, because I think that has been disgraceful.
Do we know how many care home workers have actually lost their jobs?
Apparently it's about 40,000.
Which is quite a chunk of the workforce, is it not?
Amazing, amazing. Now, I just want to interrupt and hopefully just take the pictures, if not the audio, from the chamber, because Liz Truss, in fact, will take what Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, has to say in regards to Ukraine.
Clear. They have massed over 100,000 troops on Ukraine's frontier. Russian forces are continuing to arrive in Belarus. It is only 8 years since Russia illegally annexed Crimea and stoked conflict in the Donbass region, so we know the danger is real. They have been pursuing a campaign of hybrid warfare aimed at destabilising the country. Just last week, we exposed the Kremlin's plans to install a puppet regime in Kiev. This threatening behaviour towards a sovereign, democratic, independent country is completely unacceptable. It is a clear violation of the commitments and obligations that Russia freely signed up to, from the OSCE Helsinki Final Act and the Minsk Protocols to the Budapest Memorandum, which guaranteed to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. The only way forward is for Russia to de-escalate, pull back its troops, and engage in meaningful talks on the basis of these existing obligations. That's why the UK is determined to lead the way through deterrence and diplomacy. The Prime Minister will travel to the region this week, and later today the UK will be joining discussions at the UN Security Council to apply further pressure on Russia to take the diplomatic route. I will be flying out to Moscow over the next fortnight. This builds on our campaign of diplomatic engagement over recent weeks and months. I have led calls through the G7, NATO and the OSCE to urge Russia to desist in its reckless and destabilising activities in Ukraine as well as Georgia, the Baltics and the Western Balkans. I've raised these issues directly with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Both the United States and NATO have set out areas where we could explore reciprocal measures to increase transparency, reduce risk and take forward arms control. The ball is firmly in Russia's court. While we're determined to accelerate these efforts, we do so from a position of strength. We are combining dialogue with deterrence, and that's why the Prime Minister is considering options for further deployments of our armed forces to reassure and protect allies on NATO's eastern flank. We're preparing to offer to support NATO with additional fast jets, warships and military specialists. As NATO's biggest spender in Europe on defence, we are prepared to deploy our forces accordingly. We've been very clear that a united alliance would meet any further Russian invasion of Ukraine with massive consequences for Russia's interests and economy. And we're preparing an unprecedented package of coordinated sanctions with our partners, which would impose severe costs. Today, I am setting out our readiness to act. We will be laying legislation before the House that will significantly strengthen our hand in dealing with Russia's aggressive action towards Ukraine. It will go further than ever before. Until now, the UK has only been able to sanction those linked to destabilisation of Ukraine. This new legislation will give us the power to sanction a much broader range of individuals and businesses. We will be able to target any company that is linked to the Russian state, engages in business of economic significance to the Russian state, or operates in a sector of strategic significance to the Russian state. Not only will we be able to target these entities, we will also be able to go after those who own or control them. This will be the toughest sanction regime against Russia we have ever had, and it is the most radical departure in approach since leaving the European Union. Those in and around the Kremlin will have nowhere to hide. We will make sure that those who share responsibility for the Kremlin's aggressive and destabilising action will share in bearing a heavy cost. Their assets in the UK will be frozen. No UK business or individual would be able to transact with them, and should they seek to enter the UK, they would be turned back. Laying this legislation now will enable us to act in concert with the United States and other partners rapidly, multiplying our collective impact. We will use these new powers in a targeted manner designed to damage the interests of those who bear the greatest responsibility for Russia's actions and exert the greatest pressure to change course. I will not say now exactly who we may target or with what measure, but Moscow should be clear that we will use these new powers to maximum effect if they pursue their aggressive intent towards Ukraine. Nothing is off the table. We are also standing with our Ukrainian friends by providing vital support to help them defend themselves. That's where we're supplying the country with defensive anti-tank missiles and deploying...
Foreign Secretary Liz Truss saying dialogue with deterrence is what Britain is looking at in regards to what's happening with Russia on the borders of Ukraine. The ball is firmly in Russia's court. She said nothing is off the table, though she was making that comment in relation more to some of the financial sanctions potentially available to the UK. There's talk, for instance, of using the SWIFT bank clearing system, and if Russia was barred from using that, that would have a crippling effect on its economy, rather than saying nothing's off the table in relation to military measures. Michael Portillo, a former Defence Secretary, listening to that. Two questions, Michael Portillo. Firstly, on the defence aspect to this. Talking tough, as you'd expect. Warship here, a squadron moved to Cyprus there, some soldiers moved to Eastern Europe. Does it really make a difference when Russia's got 100,000 troops on the borders of Ukraine?
Well, no, but principally because there's absolutely no question of using them in Ukraine. There's absolutely no way that Britain is going to deploy to Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, which is rather ironic because you kind of think that the great fuss that Putin has made is about how NATO is extending itself. But of course, NATO has never said that it's going to protect Ukraine. So the movement of troops and ships and so on is about giving reassurance to other countries in Eastern Europe. But it's fairly emblematic. I would have thought the more important half of the statement actually was about the financial sanctions, because there are people in Putin's court who will be quite set back if we freeze their assets or move against them. However, it won't be a painless process for us either. You talked there about kicking Russia out of the SWIFT bank settlement process. But for example, we need in the West to buy Russian gas and Russian oil. Unfortunately, Europe is highly dependent on these things, and we have to be able to pay them for that. So how do you do that if you've kicked them out of the banking system? So some of these sanctions are not entirely straightforward.
Do you buy the idea that Russia is really committed to a land grab in Ukraine? There are those people who say he just hasn't got the public support for it. He hasn't even been preparing public support in Russia, preparing mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters to get ready for service personnel losses on quite a big scale, potentially.
I mean, obviously, if you make a prediction in this area, which I think I'm about to do, you risk making a fool of yourself because it's very easy to get wrong. I mean, Putin has us all guessing. We don't know the answer. But I rather agree with those who say that it doesn't look particularly likely. What he has achieved is quite a lot. He's put himself at the centre of the world stage. He's called attention to various Russian grievances. There are quite a lot of people in the West who have signed up to these grievances and come on programmes like this one and tell you about how right Putin is to have these grievances. He's made Biden, in my view, look a complete fool. I mean, the one time that...
Biden does quite a decent job of that himself.
When the president ventured out to a press conference, he got the line completely wrong. All the administration then had to correct what the president had said, and the president has been put back in a box somewhere and is unlikely to reappear. Can you imagine sending President Biden to a summit with President Putin? So Putin has already achieved quite a lot. He's divided the United States from Europe. Germany's gone its own way. France has gone its own way. And there are negotiations, so some of his alleged grievances may be addressed.
Can we just go briefly back to the chamber? If we can see Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, still at the dispatch box, and if and when we do, Michael Portillo, I think David Lammy actually is responding for the opposition, but we were looking at Liz Truss a few moments ago. A future Prime Minister?
That'll do. You want me to make a fool of myself for a second time and say that my prediction would be not. But tying together the two topics we've been talking about, I think one of the things that's happened in the last 3 or 4 weeks that this terrible Partygate thing has been extended is that the Conservative Party has had an opportunity... Oh, my goodness, I'm very sorry about that.
That's Liz Truss. How dare you be so rude about it?
As the Conservative Party has had an opportunity to look at the options, the alternatives, and has probably decided that it's not very impressed either with Liz Truss or with Rishi Sunak. And that, again, has helped Boris.
Michael Portillo, thanks very much indeed. Do stay with us. We've got Sajid Javid's statement, Health Secretary, on, we think, what amounts to a U-turn on mandatory COVID jabs. In the meantime, we're going to bring you the rest of today's news.
It's 5:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Number 10 says the Prime Minister will consider asking Sue Gray to update her work in light of what is found by the Metropolitan Police in the investigation into rule-breaking Downing Street parties. Boris Johnson told MPs he's sorry for the things the government did not get right. Here are some of the report's key findings. Some of the behaviour surrounding the gatherings is difficult to justify. At least some of the gatherings represent a serious failure to observe high standards. The report identified failures of leadership and judgment by parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. Some staff felt unable to raise concerns about behaviours they witnessed at work. Sue Gray says the publication is extremely limited due to an ongoing police investigation. The Met Police say they've been given more than 300 photos and 500 pieces of paper as part of the investigation into the parties. The Foreign Secretary has announced a tougher sanctions regime which could be used to target senior figures linked to Vladimir Putin's administration. Liz Truss and the Prime Minister are travelling to Kiev tomorrow for crisis talks with the Ukrainian president amid fears over a Russian invasion. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is visiting counterparts in Hungary, Slovenia and Croatia with the aim of de-escalating tensions over Ukraine by strengthening links with allies. The government's expected to announce a U-turn over compulsory COVID vaccines for NHS workers. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is reportedly going to scrap the policy over fears it could lead to a major staffing crisis. And he's due to make a statement in the Commons later. Formula One has announced that COVID-19 vaccinations will be mandatory for all staff, with no exceptions. The new season is due to kick off in March with a record 23 races this year. It's understood all current drivers are fully vaccinated, but the rules will apply to teams, media and hospitality guests as well. Those are the headlines. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. After the break, it's back to Brazier and Colin.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Well, apologies if watching GB News tonight this afternoon has felt a bit like watching the parliamentary channel, but there's been some significant parliamentary developments, and I hope you forgive us for spending a lot of time focusing on events there in the chamber of the House of Commons. Let's turn to our political correspondent. As you see the green benches there, Boris Johnson was on his feet for the best part of an hour and 3/4. Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary. There's Tom Tugendhat talking about Ukraine. Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, still in Downing Street to reflect on, in particular, Tom, what we are going to hear from Sajid Javid, but more importantly, what the Prime Minister had to say.
Well, yes, absolutely. The Prime Minister had an enormous job ahead of him earlier today, obviously from 3:30 when he stood up in the House of Commons chamber. The atmosphere was really quite heavy. It was almost a sullen affair. Those who heckled, those who tried to sort of be bolshy in the way that you may expect a normal Prime Minister's questions, for example, to be like, they were almost looked down upon throughout the chamber, and the mood was more sullen. I was sitting up there in the press gallery for the Prime Minister's statement and the first chunk of those questions, and it really did seem that that the mood was a sombre one, and some people didn't quite strike it right. It was a little bit eyebrow-raising that the Prime Minister threw barbs at the Leader of the Opposition, one raising Jimmy Savile and the other suggesting that members of the front bench, the opposition front bench, might be taking drugs. This was not quite so becoming from a Prime Minister who obviously felt under attack, not least of all from a couple of voices on his own side. There were some pretty big interventions there from Theresa May particularly, who asked a stinging question of the Prime Minister, but also of Andrew Mitchell, who declared that he thought that the Prime Minister should step down. I think the most important takeaway, however, from the Prime Minister's statement earlier today is that he did not commit to publishing the full Sue Gray report. We've of course seen this sort of cut down, hobbled version of the Sue Gray report today, but the Prime Minister would not put on record that he would want Sue Gray to publish the full report after the Metropolitan Police investigation has concluded, and that's raised some eyebrows, not least with his own side.
Tom, for now, thanks very much indeed. Tom Harwood there. Going to be talking to Dave Penman from the Civil Servants Union very soon, because there are presumably people in the civil service, the higher echelons in Downing Street, elsewhere in Whitehall, who feel perhaps the Prime Minister needs to take more responsibility as a politician when civil servants are coming under fire. I rather suspect that's what Dave Penman has to say. We're going to be talking to Andrew Bridgen, the Conservative MP, no fan at times of Boris Johnson, soon as well. Michael Portillo is still alongside me, reflecting on events in Parliament today. Tom Harwood there suggesting that the Conservative backbenches were kind of in a sulk. I mean, they may be in a sulk, but do they do anything about their sulkiness?
I didn't think that was entirely the point, that it was sombre rather than sulky. In other words, they really thought this was a moment when the nation was looking at them, that a very serious series of judgments were being delivered, even in this mangled report, and that they had to reflect that national mood. I entirely agree with Tom that some members of Parliament didn't understand that, and I think Boris absolutely was one of them. The second half of his response, and then a couple of remarks he made after that, did not hit the tone of the House of Commons, and that won't have helped him because, you know, at least they wanted, his own backbenchers, wanted to believe that he had taken this moment seriously, that he had, in his own words, got it. And with some of his behaviour today, it wasn't totally clear that he had got it. So I think that was part of his problem today. One of the reasons why I think Boris lost ground today.
Yeah, and we're going to go to Andrew Bridgen in just a second, but just on this critical point that we are bombarded with emails, people saying, you guys in the media, you get sucked in by the BBC and Sky's tractor beam, but actually you forget the importance of what the other things that Boris Johnson's done. This is media tittle-tattle. It's Westminster bubble stuff. You're obsessing. The big stuff doesn't change. To them, you say what?
Oh, I certainly say that Boris's getting Brexit done is phenomenal. That Boris winning the election with 80 seats was phenomenal. Getting rid of members of Parliament who disagree with him at the end of the last Parliament was phenomenal. And more by luck than by judgment, I think the coronavirus policy has been pretty good. However, that's not what people are interested in. They're interested in whether he is so damaged that he can't win again.
Andrew Bridgen joins us now, the Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire. Andrew Bridgen, what did you make of what Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, said today in the House?
Well, it was a difficult session for the Prime Minister. He's also going to be addressing the Conservative Parliamentary Party at 6:30, and that's going to be fascinating this evening. The Sugray report is completely filleted of most of the facts that people would have liked to have seen for obvious reasons, given the Met's request. However, the facts that are in there are fairly damning. Failure of leadership across Number 10 and the Cabinet Office, which widens the blame. It doesn't actually mention the Prime Minister at all, but ultimately he is the Prime Minister. He sets the culture in Number 10. And as I've said before, I think the problem is that what was emerged from Number 10 during the lockdowns, the behaviour of those around the Prime Minister, show that I think the Prime Minister's lost the moral authority to lead the nation in the event of a national crisis, where he's asking the public to suffer privations and make sacrifices. I just don't think he has that moral authority when we know that those around him and himself didn't abide by his own rules during the lockdown. And for me, that makes his position untenable, unfortunately. I suggested he should have gone a few weeks ago and we could have avoided this death by 1,000 cuts is what I think we're seeing now. It's damaging the country, damaging the government, and it's damaging the Conservative Party.
Well, let's see if that's a view shared by another Conservative backbencher, Paul Scully. We'll say thank you to Andrew Bridgen. Andrew, thanks very much indeed. Paul Scully, MP, thanks for your time. I know the schedule's probably slipped. The Prime Minister was due to address his backbenchers at 6:30, but the whole thing's been overrunning. How critical is that next act in this drama?
Well, I think it's really important that the Prime Minister continues to engage with the parliamentary party, and it is the wider parliamentary party, not just backbenchers, because we want to make sure that there's open dialogue, so that as he's looking to change the culture and the governance of Number 10, that he really reflects what people are saying to him, what colleagues are saying to him, because they're the ones that are going to be wanting to feed into Number 10. Moving forward, to make sure that they get their ideas and their voices heard.
Yeah, Paul Scully, as a minister for small businesses, you will have, I'm sure, people who get in touch with you as a minister saying, "Could you help us with this particular aspect of government business, tax policy, whatever it is?" However, this is something of a different order altogether, isn't it? This is existential stuff potentially for your party. If this is reflected, if some of this public anger is reflected come those May elections, who knows what you're left with?
Well, I think there's two things there. I mean, first of all, there's clear anger from people up and down the country. I lost my mother and two uncles throughout the pandemic. Couldn't have the kind of funerals we wanted for some of my uncles. But so I can understand why people are annoyed. What it's important now that we look at things in the round. We've had this Sugray update. Clearly, the Met have got their investigation that we want to see, because we want the answers. Nobody wants this to keep rumbling on, because we've got to get on with doing the job. We've got the real risk of a war on the other side of Europe with Russia and Ukraine. People are worried about the cost of living pressures. We're coming out of the pandemic now. The excellent work that's happened with the booster program allows us to get on the front foot for the recovery. But then you talk about May. What we can't do is we can't work on the media cycles now to talk about what councillors are doing in their local areas. Because I'm a London MP. I live in Sutton, and I've seen the failures of the Lib Dem council there. You see then in somewhere like Wandsworth, where they're doing a really good job, got the lowest council rate there. What you don't want to do is councillors to be able to distract and deflect their delivery or lack of delivery to something that's going on up in Westminster, because that's just living off the back of some really hard-working councillors.
Paul Scully, Michael Portillo's alongside me here in the studio, listening intently to what you've got to say, and like you was an MP, a Conservative MP in Greater London until you weren't. Yes. Your thoughts for Paul Scully? Any advice for Paul Scully?
Oh no, I wouldn't dream of advising Paul Scully. People are talking about the council elections. I mean, the council elections will be very bad for the Conservatives, but they usually are when the Conservatives are in office. So I wouldn't put too much weight on that. It is extraordinary that the Conservatives apparently are only 5 points behind Labour. The Conservatives, when in government, have often been much further behind the opposition than that. And by the way, they very often won the subsequent election. The difficult decision for Conservative MPs is whether they think Boris has the best chance of winning the general election next time, a better chance than, say, Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. It's not for me to advise, but my own feeling is that probably Boris does have the best chance of winning the next general election, better than the others. And that puts Conservative MPs in a real quandary, because a lot of them do think he's lost all moral authority, but he might still be the best election winner.
Well, let me just put a point you made to us and our viewers earlier, Michael Portillo, back to Paul Scully. And Paul Scully, it was this point. Michael Portillo was making the point that given the intake from the last general election, the 80-seat majority, but actually a lot of people who didn't necessarily expect to become members of Parliament, frankly, and now find themselves in that position. And he was suggesting, and I hope I don't misquote him, but suggesting there is a disconnect that we haven't seen for a long time within living memory, because you've got so many new parliamentarians and they kind of don't quite get the rules of the game.
No, well, it's not a game. I think that's the first thing to note there. But you're right about the fact that the rhythms of Parliament they're odd. It's a difficult life, as Michael, I'm sure, will attest to. And so when you've had people come in and then suddenly within 3 months being on lockdown, they haven't had the chance to necessarily speak to colleagues that have been there longer than me, way longer than me. And we do need to have a bit of a reset in terms of our relationship across the parliamentary party. But nonetheless, within that 2019 intake, who are doing amazing work in their local constituencies and offering an extra energy to our parliamentary party, you have some of those the so-called red wall seats there. You also have some people that have come in to replace other members who have retired in the more safer traditional Tory seats. So it's, we can't just pigeonhole all of them in one go. But the feedback that they're coming is mixed. Lots of people are saying that Boris is still really, significantly liked by their constituency. He's still a vote winner in their constituency. And Michael's absolutely right in that regard, that we've got to look at the next general election. But what we don't want to be doing is spending the next 3 months when people are just worried about the pound in their pocket and about whether their businesses are going to be able to motor through the recovery. We don't want to be speaking to ourselves as a party for the next 3 months in a leadership campaign.
Paul Scully, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. One of the many and several Conservative MPs who will be, we presume, attending that meeting that the Prime Minister will be addressing of Conservative backbenchers soon. We're still waiting on Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, by the way, to make that statement that's expected to mean a U-turn on that policy about compulsory vaccinations for NHS staff. Something like 70-odd thousand still hadn't been jabbed. They will not now, we think, lose their jobs as a consequence. Well, the Sue Gray report also highly critical of senior civil servants, obviously not by name. There have also been suggestions that a number of Whitehall staff could be fired as part of a clean-up operation. Let's turn to Dave Penman, who's the General Secretary of the FDA, Union for Managers and Professionals in Public Service. Dave Penman, appreciate your time. Thanks very much. Is it your concern, your worry, that civil servants will lose their jobs when actually it ought to be politicians, elected politicians, carrying the can?
Well, I think if you look at Sue Gray's report, it says there was a failure of leadership. It doesn't define what that means. That could be officials, those senior civil servants who are managing number 10, and it also could be the Prime Minister as well. So we have to wait and see. I think. Ultimately now all we've got is an update. Clearly, the detail of what actually has gone on over those 16 incidents that have been investigated will determine whether there's potential disciplinary action or consequences for any civil servant. So we need to wait and see. I was, to be honest, a little disappointed when I heard the Prime Minister today. He talked about a review of the Civil Service Code and the code for special advisors. There was no mention of the ministerial code, so it did feel a little bit like the Prime Minister was starting to point the finger at civil servants and special advisors and suggest that there's nothing to be learned for ministers in all of this, but we need to wait and see.
The opposition benches about the ministerial code, wasn't there, and the fact that the ultimate arbiter of lots of its own interpretation is the Prime Minister and his fitness to do that or otherwise. Dave Penman, can I just ask you a very specific question? It's something we haven't addressed so far since the Sue Gray report emerged. This idea of the booze culture sometimes within number 10, Prime Minister said, look, it's not just a little office. There are 400 people, up to 400 people who work there under enormous pressure. There will be those people who say, actually, look, if you're trying to bring a team together, booze has got a role to play.
Of course, I mean, most people who work in an office or other workplaces at some point will have had a drink, whether it's someone leaving the kind of end of the week or whatever. I think, though, that can spill into a culture that's counterproductive. And we've yet to see the detail, but from what Sue Gray has said in her report, it's clear that she thinks actually that's what's happened. That the culture of taking alcohol either at the end of the working day, end of the working week, or in parties has really kind of got out of hand. That's what I'm reading in terms of looking at her report. And I think that then questions all sorts of other issues and judgments that people necessarily would make. So I think she's indicating that there's something that's gone too far at this point, not that actually, of course, someone having a glass of wine toasting someone who's leaving or at the end of the day is a particular problem. But obviously, there's also the issue about what that meant in lockdown and judgments that were made about lockdown. What I don't think we're seeing here, though, is a culture across the civil service. I think it does seem quite extraordinary that the events in number 10, it's not what I would recognise across anywhere else in the civil service, and there's certainly no evidence of it anywhere else in the civil service. So I think there'll be a question there about why is this number 10 got that particular culture when it hasn't really applied in previous number 10s or elsewhere in Whitehall.
OK. Dave Benton, we're going to cut it short there, just almost out of time, but really appreciate your time today. Thanks very much indeed. Michael Portillo with some closing thoughts on events today, former Cabinet Minister with long experience of politics. How important is this meeting, do you think, of backbenchers that's coming up?
About as important as what happened in the House of Commons, so everything is important at this stage. Just to put it in context, no civil servant will lose his or her job. The civil servant would move from one position to another. The Prime Minister may lose his job, and that is what it's all about. And that decision is in the hands of the backbenchers with whom he's meeting at 6:30.
And one thing you've been keen to stress throughout the course of the last hour and a half or so, and it's something that strikes me, is that you do not feel there is an adequate replacement for the Prime Minister. So anybody who's thinking about pulling the knife, the dagger out of its scabbard? I'm lost for the word.
Scabbard,
yeah. Thank you.
Well,
or to think twice.
If you're a Red Wall MP, you won your seat last time with Boris and Brexit. There'll be no Brexit next time, and there may be no Boris. Will you win your seat without either Boris or Brexit? That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. But Michael Portillo, really appreciate you coming in today. Thanks ever so much. And do keep it tuned here, because we're still expecting to hear from Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary. We've been listening to 2 or 3 doctors in recent weeks who've made the case very forcefully and reasonably that actually there is no argument for the compulsory vaccination of national health NHS workers, including doctors. They seem to have won the day. The Royal College of GPs said they hoped the government would perform a U-turn. It would appear that is about to happen. Stay tuned here on GB News. Health Secretary Sajid Javid coming up.
Hello again. Storm Corrie is clearing away and the winds continue to ease down today. But tomorrow will still be windy, especially once more across northern Scotland. Quite a mild day to come as well. Some warm air tucked in behind this warm front, but it's not with us yet. It's still quite cold and blustery through Monday evening out there. Still a few showers across the far northeast and the odd one for Wales and southern England, but much of the south dry till that warm front brings rain across Scotland, Northern Ireland, trickling into North Wales and northern England through the night and eventually into parts of the Midlands. It will be a mild night. Temperatures early on could dip well down into single figures, but by dawn, we're mostly looking at temperatures of 7 or 8 Celsius. So a pretty mild start to Tuesday. Quite a grey day for England and Wales, and it will be windy once more across the far northeast. Not as windy as the stormy week.